Anita Kapoor and Rajiv Mehra appear to have a perfect life in Canada. But behind closed doors, secrets festered, desires collided, and a hidden affair would ignite a chain of events that ended in brutal murder. She arrived in Canada with a single suitcase and a carefully guarded sense of hope. Leaving India behind was not just a change of country, but a quiet surrender of everything familiar. The cold air, the wide roads, and the silent neighborhoods felt strange and unwelcoming. Her marriage had already begun to feel routine back home, but she believed that moving abroad would fix what distance and time had weakened. In the beginning, she tried to convince herself that this new life was a gift, something many only dreamed of. Days passed slowly inside a small rented house in a suburban area. While her husband left early for work and returned late, she remained alone for long hours. The television played in the background, but it could not replace real conversations. Phone calls to family in India became shorter as time zones and busy lives created gaps. She learned to hide her loneliness behind polite smiles during occasional community gatherings. To others, she appeared calm and grateful, but inside, she felt invisible. The isolation began to shape her thoughts. Simple routines like cooking and cleaning started to feel meaningless. She missed being noticed, being heard, and being valued. Her husband, burdened by financial pressure and long work hours, seemed emotionally distant. They shared the same space, but lived separate emotional lives. Small misunderstandings turned into silence, and silence turned into emotional walls. As weeks turned into months, the promise of a better future slowly faded. Canada no longer felt like an opportunity, but a cage built from comfort and loneliness. She stood at the window many evenings, watching unfamiliar faces pass by, wondering how a life that looked stable from the outside could feel so empty inside. That emptiness quietly prepared the ground for choices that would later change everything. The loneliness she carried began to push her toward places she had never explored before. With no close friends and no family nearby, her phone became her closest companion. Social media offered a world where she could exist without judgment, where no one knew her past or her disappointments. Late at night, while the house was silent, she scrolled endlessly, reading stories of people who seemed happier and freer than she felt. That was when she noticed a message from a stranger who lived in the same city. At first, the conversations were innocent and careful. He asked about her adjustment to life in Canada and listened to her frustrations with patience. Unlike her husband, he seemed interested in her thoughts and emotions. The attention felt comforting, almost healing. Over time, the messages grew more personal. She shared parts of herself she had kept hidden for years, and the connection deepened quickly. Each notification brought excitement, breaking the dull rhythm of her days. What started as emotional support slowly crossed into something dangerous. They began arranging short meetings under harmless excuses. She convinced herself that she deserved this happiness, that it was only temporary and harmless. The secrecy added thrill to her otherwise predictable life. She became more careful with her phone, deleting messages and changing routines. The lies came easily, and with them, a sense of control she had never felt before. She believed the affair existed in a private world, untouched by consequences. But every choice she made left behind traces she failed to notice. Patterns formed, habits repeated, and confidence turned into carelessness. She did not realize that comfort can be more dangerous than fear. While she felt seen and valued for the first time in years, the hidden connection quietly set events in motion that could no longer be stopped. The tension inside the house continued to build, even though nothing was openly spoken. Her confidence grew as the secrecy of the affair continued without interruption. Meetings became more frequent, and caution slowly faded. She believed she had mastered the art of deception, unaware that every repeated habit made her easier to predict. The excitement she felt blinded her to the risks surrounding her. Her husband, on the other hand, had reached a point where emotion gave way to calculation. The pain of betrayal turned into something colder and more focused. He stopped reacting and started planning. He paid attention to the days she left the house without clear reasons, the times she returned late, and the routes she preferred. Every detail was stored carefully in his mind. What looked like calm acceptance was actually dangerous patience. He avoided confrontation because confrontation meant losing control. Instead, he imagined outcomes where humiliation did not follow him. His thoughts shifted from questions to certainty. He convinced himself that restoring his honor required action, not words. In his mind, justice became personal, and consequences felt justified. The idea of revenge slowly transformed into a structured plan. Meanwhile, she felt secure in her double life. She did not notice how her husband's behavior changed from distant to observant. The silence between them grew heavier, but she mistook it for indifference. She failed to recognize that silence can hide intent. The balance between secrecy and exposure had already tipped. By the time she sensed something was wrong, it was too late. A plan had been formed in quiet moments and sleepless nights. What began as emotional pain evolved into a decision that would destroy lives. The path forward was no longer uncertain, only waiting for the right moment to unfold. The tension inside the house continued to build, even though nothing was openly spoken. Her confidence grew as the secrecy of the affair continued without interruption. Meetings became more frequent, and caution slowly faded. She believed she had mastered the art of deception, unaware that every repeated habit made her easier to predict. The excitement she felt blinded her to the risks surrounding her. Her husband, on the other hand, had reached a point where emotion gave way to calculation. The pain of betrayal turned into something colder and more focused. He stopped reacting and started planning. He paid attention to the days she left the house without clear reasons, the times she returned late, and the routes she preferred. Every detail was stored carefully in his mind. What looked like calm acceptance was actually dangerous patience. He avoided confrontation because confrontation meant losing control. Instead, he imagined outcomes where humiliation did not follow him. His thoughts shifted from questions to certainty. He convinced himself that restoring his honor required action, not words. In his mind, justice became personal, and consequences felt justified. The idea of revenge slowly transformed into a structured plan. Meanwhile, she felt secure in her double life. She did not notice how her husband's behavior changed from distant to observant. The silence between them grew heavier, but she mistook it for indifference. She failed to recognize that silence can hide intent. The balance between secrecy and exposure had already tipped. By the time she sensed something was wrong, it was too late. A plan had been formed in quiet moments and sleepless nights. What began as emotional pain evolved into a decision that would destroy lives. The path forward was no longer uncertain, only waiting for the right moment to unfold. The night arrived wrapped in bitter cold and false confidence. She left the house believing she had calculated every detail, trusting routine more than instinct. Snow covered the streets, muting sounds and hiding movement. The meeting location was familiar, chosen many times before, and that familiarity created a dangerous sense of safety. She did not notice the distance between expectation and reality narrowing with every step she took. What followed happened faster than fear could fully form. The quiet surroundings became the stage for sudden violence driven by weeks of controlled rage. The moment trust turned into shock, there was no time to escape or reconsider. Panic replaced excitement, and confusion replaced certainty. The attack was not fueled by impulse alone, but by a plan that had already crossed the point of no return. In that frozen space, a life was taken with deliberate force. After it was over, the silence felt heavier than before. The cold air carried no comfort, only the weight of what had been done. The body was left behind as the night continued without pause. Snow began to fall again, slowly covering evidence that could not truly be erased. What seemed hidden was only delayed, waiting to be uncovered. The person responsible moved quickly, driven not by relief but by urgency. Every action afterward was focused on distance rather than remorse. There was no victory in the act, only a hollow sense of finality. The violence did not bring peace or closure, only a new and permanent fear. That night did not end with escape, but with the beginning of consequences. While the town slept unaware, a tragedy settled into place. The snow-covered ground held more than silence. It held a truth that would soon rise, changing everything forever. The discovery came days later, when the cold could no longer hide what had been left behind. A passerby noticed something unnatural along a quiet stretch where snow had begun to melt unevenly. Police arrived quickly, sealing off the area as the reality of the scene became clear. The calm suburban town was shaken by the presence of sudden violence, something it was unprepared to face. News spread fast, replacing routine headlines with fear and speculation. Investigators worked carefully, documenting every detail. The location suggested familiarity rather than chance, raising early questions about motive. Identification did not take long, and once her name was released, shock rippled through both local residents and immigrant communities. She was known as quiet, reserved, and untroubled. The contrast between her public image and the way she was found created confusion and disbelief. As authorities traced her final movements, attention shifted from sympathy to scrutiny. Digital records revealed secret routines that no one had suspected. Locations, timestamps, and repeated patterns painted a picture far different from the one her neighbors recognized. The existence of an affair quickly surfaced, changing how the case was viewed. What once seemed like a random act now appeared deeply personal. Media coverage intensified, and details were discussed publicly, often without mercy. Her private life became a subject of analysis rather than understanding. Investigators narrowed their focus to those closest to her, reconstructing timelines with precision. Every connection was examined, every silence questioned. The town that once barely noticed her existence now knew her name too well. Candlelight vigils and whispered conversations filled the streets. While the community searched for meaning, the evidence continued to speak quietly but clearly. The case was no longer about what happened, but about who knew, who watched, and who waited for the right moment to act. The investigation moved swiftly once digital evidence was analyzed. Phone records, messages, and GPS locations revealed a detailed pattern that could no longer be ignored. The husband's carefully constructed silence began to unravel under the weight of facts. Every meeting, every deviation from routine, and every late-night call formed a timeline that left little room for doubt. What he had thought was hidden in plain sight was now meticulously documented by technology. Detectives reconstructed the sequence of events, piecing together movements from both the victim and her secret companion. The affair, once invisible, now became central to understanding the motive. The narrative shifted from random tragedy to a calculated act born of anger and betrayal. As evidence mounted, the husband's composure faltered. His confidence, which had been the foundation of his planning, gave way to anxiety. The lover, who had seemed an untouchable part of the story, faded into the background. While once a symbol of secret joy, he was now only a witness to the consequences of choices made in haste and secrecy. The investigation revealed that the crime had been premeditated. The timing, location, and method were all deliberate. What had seemed impulsive to outsiders was actually the result of long, careful observation. Forensic details confirmed the brutality, making it impossible to ignore the intent behind the act. Investigators noted every calculated step taken to control and dominate the situation. The husband's obsession with pride and control had reached its deadly conclusion, leaving no ambiguity about responsibility. By the time charges were formally brought, the truth was undeniable. The meticulous investigation exposed not only the crime itself, but also the hidden emotional dynamics that had led to it. What had begun as a quiet, lonely life had spiraled into violence, forever altering the lives of everyone involved and serving as a stark warning of how secrecy and betrayal. The case closed with a conviction, bringing a sense of legal resolution but leaving emotional wounds wide open. The husband was sentenced, his carefully planned life replaced by cold prison walls. Justice, measured by law, did little to soothe the grief left behind. Families, friends, and neighbors were forced to confront the reality that someone they had known as ordinary and calm could commit something so violent. The community struggled to reconcile the image of a quiet suburban household with the brutality that had occurred behind closed doors. Conversations that once centered on daily routines now revolved around suspicion, betrayal, and the fragility of trust. Her story became a cautionary tale whispered among immigrant families living far from home, a reminder that loneliness and secrecy can have deadly consequences. Despite the conviction, many questions lingered. Could the tragedy have been prevented? How many warning signs were ignored? What had driven ordinary people to cross lines that could never be uncrossed? Investigators and psychologists alike analyzed the case, attempting to understand the emotional and psychological forces behind the crime. Each insight offered clarity, but none erased the loss. Her life, once filled with hope for a new beginning in Canada, was now remembered only for its abrupt and violent end. The affair that had seemed like an escape became a symbol of vulnerability and hidden desire, a choice that set irreversible events in motion. The husband, now confined, faced years of isolation, confronting the reality that control and pride had destroyed more than just a life. They had destroyed futures, trust, and the possibility of redemption. The story left a chilling lesson. Secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, rarely remain buried. Betrayal and obsession, when left unchecked, can escalate into irreversible tragedy. In the quiet streets where snow once fell silently, the memory of one woman's choices and one man's wrath linger.